when we're talking about a narcissist, we're talking about somebody who's built on something very different than what a healthy person is built on. And regardless of how arrogant or grandiose they look, they have an insecure core. They tend to see relationships in a very superficial way. Guilt literally becomes the air you breathe in a narcissistic relationship. Boundary is that space between you and me. It's where I end and you begin.
Hey everybody, Hunter Otis here. Welcome to the Porn-Free Revolution, where we help guys quit porn, integrate their sexuality, and become irresistible. Super stoked today. We have a special guest, Chelsey Cole, with us. Welcome, Chelsey. Thanks for jumping on. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Very happy to be here.
Yeah, we get to talk about the special N-word today, narcissism. And it's a big one because many of our members, I know that I personally have dealt with narcissists in my life, and it's extremely difficult. But when it comes to sexual addiction, pornography addiction, or compulsive pornography use habits, etc., sometimes this can play a big role, whether it's, you're actually a narcissist or just have narcissistic tendencies, or you're in relationship with someone that is, whether that's in your intimate relationship or in the workforce. I mean, this is a hard one to navigate. And so, Chelsey, I'm really, really grateful for your expertise so that you can teach us today, because I definitely have questions for you, and I'm sure that this is going to be a good one for our listeners. So again, thank you so much for joining us. To give you guys, go ahead.
I would say, happy to be here. It's definitely a hot topic, and one I think a lot of the label narcissism gets thrown out there a lot. So I'm glad that we'll be able to break it down and see what it is and what it's actually not.
Yes. Yeah. And it takes some specialized knowledge to be able to venture into this, because this is a whole new realm of stuff we're dealing with here. So again, thank you. And guys, so Chelsey, she's a licensed psychotherapist. She's also a certified partner trauma therapist. She's also, in her past history, has dealt with this personally. So if there's somebody that knows what to do, it's her. She's also written a book. It's called If Only I'd Known: How to Outsmart Narcissists, Set Guilt-Free Boundaries, and Create Unshakable Self-Worth. So of course, I'll put links to all of this below the description, but we've got a lot to be able to learn from today. So let's dive in. Chelsey, first off, what is a narcissist? Okay, that word gets thrown around like crazy, or people will just label other people with it, but what is it really? If you can just lay it out for us.
Yeah, it's so important to identify what we're talking about. And I like to start by just even defining the difference between NPD and narcissism, because sometimes a lot of the pushback that I hear from people is like, well, it's not nice or it's not right to diagnose somebody. And we're really not when we're talking about narcissism. So NPD, narcissistic personality disorder, is a diagnosis in the DSM. As with all personality disorders, a couple of things has to happen. It has to be diagnosed by a licensed mental health professional. And the narcissistic patterns that we're talking about, like grandiosity, entitlement, interpersonal exploitativeness, a lack of empathy, having very superficial relationships, all of that has to be pervasive and has to have some serious social and occupational impairment in the person's life. And so someone can be highly narcissistic all their life and not necessarily ever be diagnosed with NPD if they don't go to a therapist, which most narcissists are not.
Right, most won't.
No, they're not. And even if they do, they're probably in there for couples therapy, and they say it's somebody else's fault or they have to be here. And in some more severe cases, they're court ordered to be in therapy. So
right.
NPD is, obviously a personality disorder. But when I'm talking about narcissism, or that someone is being a narcissist, I'm talking about someone who displays moderate to high narcissistic traits. And narcissism is a personality trait, just like introversion, extroversion, agreeableness. And it includes things like someone being very high conflict, being really chronically validation seeking. They lack empathy. They look at relationships in a very transactional way. So it's what you can give me. They kind of treat people like products. So they don't have a lot of empathy for that person. We don't have empathy for a product. And that's unfortunately how narcissists view people. So they will charm you, lie to you, manipulate you. It all depends on what they need from you at the time. They tend to see they tend to see relationships in a very superficial way. So they struggle with intimacy. They struggle with building connection, really caring about other people, because they just kind of see relationships as this big chessboard. And it's like, how can I move you here? And what do I want from you at the time?
Yeah.
So when we're talking about a narcissist, we're talking about somebody who's built on something very different than what a healthy person is built on. They, regardless of how arrogant or grandiose they look, they have an insecure core. They do not have a healthy sense of self esteem, no matter how they look. And we know that because in order to have a healthy sense of self esteem, you have to have an accurate self appraisal. So you have to be able to say, well, here's my strengths and here's my weaknesses and here's what I'm good at and here's what I'm struggling with, and have a honest self-reflection. And narcissists aren't doing that. So all that bravado is really a cover-up for the insecure core. And then they have these defense mechanisms like denial, projection, contempt, to protect that insecure core. That's why they deny what they do. They deny what they've said. They say things are your fault. They say that you're doing what they're doing. So if they're being difficult and betraying you, then they say that that's actually what you're doing to them. And so
Yep.
they've got all these defense mechanisms to protect that insecure core. And that leads them to seek out a lot of validation from other people. They're not trying to build an authentic sense of self where their words and actions match and they want to try to genuinely be a kind person. They just want validation. They want narcissistic supply, which is attention, validation, admiration from other people. So they
Right.
function very differently than a non-narcissistic person.
Yeah, it's interesting because, oh man, I mean, with me reflecting on my own recovery journey, I mean, I can definitely see with everything that you just described, I can see how I personally displayed those qualities throughout that process, right?
Yeah.
Uh, and it's almost like a sign of just immaturity, like we're underdeveloped in a lot of ways too.
Yeah.
It's kind of like children are very egocentric, like, and they have to
Mm-hmm.
be because it's a stage of development that they're in. But if you don't grow out of that and continue to mature into adulthood, if everything's just revolving around you,
For
it causes
sure.
problems.
Right. Yeah, it does. And narcissists are known for being quite emotionally immature. A lot of people, when they're interacting with a narcissist, will say, I feel like I'm bouncing between dealing with a toddler and a teenager. Like it's
Yeah,
somewhere in between there. And I will say, because some people will hear this and go, that's me. Maybe it is, but it, there can be that overlap where if someone is in any kind of active addiction, they can look narcissistic. Now,
yes,
whether once the addiction is addressed, that's when we see, was it related to the addiction or is there true narcissistic traits going on here?
right, exactly. So, like, if you're listening to this, guys, and you're the one that's struggling with pornography or some kind of sexual behavior or any other kind of compulsive behavior, and you're struggling in your relationship, like, I just don't want to scare you away right now. Like, we're
Mm-hmm.
not labeling you with some diagnoses right now. But the reality is that when we're caught up in these destructive patterns and shame essentially is running the show, and we don't have a solid sense of self, like, we can kind of wreak havoc in our own lives and in the lives of the people that we love. And it's not that you're I mean, to give you some of the benefit of the doubt doesn't mean that you're intentionally doing this stuff. But this is why this is so important to broach this subject, to shine the light on, okay, where am I potentially exhibiting some of these things? And can I do something about it? Because
Mm-hmm.
most of the time you can. And is this kind of feeding into even a lot of the stress and shame you're feeling? And if we can alleviate some of these tendencies, can you get a lot of relief that's going to actually reduce the urges to act out and what have you, and improve your relationship with your intimate partner? So very, very cool. Thank you for just like the clarification, because I think it is really confusing. Again, a ton of people hear this word but don't really know what it means. So what does it look like? Like, let's say, how do you spot somebody in your life, whether this is narcissism in your partner or elsewhere, maybe in the workplace? Like, how do
Mm-hmm.
you know if you're dealing with someone who's a narcissist or at least has narcissistic tendencies?
Yeah. So, of course, there's the patterns you can be looking for and the patterns of behavior, like we described, that they seem to be
Right.
entitled. Everything's about me. There's a lack of empathy. They're always caring more about their reputation than their character. But um, a way you can kind of cut through all of that is our body is amazing in that it gives us it's like a feedback system to let us know how we feel around different people. And so I
Mhm.
like to use acronyms because acronyms help me remember things. So I think of it as you often lose your sense of self in these relationships. So you can remember that GPS is how you're going to feel, and the GPS can help you figure out if you're dealing with a narcissist or not. And that stands for guilt, grief, so two G's, pity, and shame. So if you are dealing with a narcissistic person, you're going to experience a lot of guilt. And often that comes because a narcissistic person is constantly throwing accountability. They're not going to take accountability. They're not going to take responsibility. Guilt literally becomes the air you breathe in a narcissistic relationship because
Yeah.
narcissists will also make unrelated connections between things. So let's say that you do the family budget, but they always overspend, but then they say, you're the reason we can't go on family vacation. Or
Yeah.
if you have a narcissistic parent or let's say a mom and they want you to take them to the doctor, but you can't, you have to work, so you can't take them when they want you to, then they say, well, you're the reason that I'm still sick. And so they make these unrelated connections. And then because you are a kind, self reflective person, you wonder, well, should I have done more and should I have been more patient? And maybe I could have like showed up for them better at that time. And so then you start to experience a lot of guilt, not because you genuinely done something wrong, but simply because something isn't going well in your relationship and you're conditioned over time to take responsibility for it.
Yeah. Holy cow.
Yeah.
Yeah, like let that one sink in for just a second. Like guys listening to this or gals, like reflect on that. Like, does that come up for you in your intimate relationship or with a relationship with a family member, a relationship with a coworker or a boss? Are you getting caught up in that kind of a dance?
Yeah, guilt is one of those things I mean, working with clients all the time. I think that's probably one of the most common feelings, and it becomes so conditioned you don't even necessarily realize that you're feeling it. So really
Hmm.
taking a minute to go, who do I consistently at least feel guilty around? Like I've done something wrong, and I almost can't even identify why I'm feeling that way.
Yep.
And the G is grief. There's a lot of grief that comes in these relationships because it feels like a big loss. A lot of times these are people that are important to you. They are your parent, your partner, your boss. It's a workplace, it's colleagues, it's friends, people you grew up with. And so there's a sense of why can't I make this work, which kind of goes to the S and the shame too. Like, what's wrong with me? Why do I keep having these difficulties in these relationships? Everybody else seems like they have a good marriage or a good relationship at work or with their parents, and I keep struggling. I can't seem to make it better. So there's definitely a sense of ongoing grief and loss. And it really becomes complex grief once you start to make sense of it, because then you have to grieve what you thought it was, what it actually is, what you hoped it could be. And so
Right.
there's so many layers to the grief in these relationships.
That's really, really important. I have a family member who I think I wouldn't diagnose them as like with borderline personality disorder necessarily, but definitely some strong borderline tendencies, right?
Mm-hmm.
And part of that, the grief around that, like you're describing, is recognizing that even though I would like my relationship to be here, they're truly only capable of having the relationship be here,
Yeah.
and having to then establish boundaries so that the
Mm-hmm.
relationship is healthy and not boundaryless, which is kind of the borderline
Right.
thing. Also, narcissism, there's a lot of those tendencies in there as well. But um, that's hard because I want to have a deeper relationship with this
Mm-hmm.
person, but you can't when they're simply not capable. And having to admit that is a huge loss, even though it's not you, it's someone you love and want to be in relationship with, but they're only capable of going so far. And so,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
grief.
coming to terms with the fact that this relationship may not be what you want it to be. Like I said, these are often such important people in our lives, and being able to realize or having to realize I may not be able to have a parent who really wants what's best for me. I may not be able to have a marriage where I can totally truly rely on my spouse. Like
Right.
there's a lot of grief and loss that can come from that.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
and the P is for pity. So this is definitely even more pronounced if you're dealing with a vulnerable narcissist, often called a covert narcissist. The
Mm.
narcissists that seem just very victimized, helpless, like you feel really sorry for them. They use a lot of weaponized incompetence, where they get mad at you for expecting them to be able to do anything. So the vulnerable, like sad, depressed kind of looking narcissist, you feel a lot of pity for, because that's actually how they get supply. That's how they get attention from you. It's the opposite from the grandiose narcissist. They want you to see them as the best, the most successful. Vulnerable narcissists actually kind of benefit from you seeing them as incapable or not able to do for themselves, because that's how they get you to do more for them.
Yeah, so it ends up they still end up having people revolve around them, just in
Yeah,
a negative way. It's
exactly.
like
They're always the victim.
yeah, it's like it's kind of like a child. If they're not getting attention, like
Yeah.
like positive attention, well, then they're going to behave negatively because they need attention, right? At the end of
Yep.
the day, they're going to find a way to get it. But as an adult, like, yeah, that's not very attractive. And
It's so sneaky. Yeah, because
yeah,
you have so many people who would genuinely think like they can't help it, and so they'll have so many enablers around them, uh,
mm,
who are basically coddling and enabling this behavior. So there can be a lot of codependency that's swirling around these vulnerable narcissists, because the codependent, behavior is take care of, take accountability for, take responsibility for, and the vulnerable narcissist lets you, go into perpetuity with that.
yeah, wow. Yeah, interesting. So this is a big perspective shift, guys and gals. It's not just, the classic like one up grandiose narcissist
Yeah.
that you're thinking of. This could be someone who's really playing hardcore into that victim role and is, yeah, yeah, very interesting.
Yeah. So that last S is for shame, which I touched on a minute earlier. But
Hmm.
shame that you can't make this relationship better. Like narcissists are making you feel responsible for things you can't control. So then you also often feel guilty when you're not able to make things better, and then shame that your relationship isn't looking like other people's. And a lot of times this makes you isolate as well, because you don't really necessarily want people to know what's going on or how hard things are or how much your relationship is struggling. So you keep it to yourself, and that just for you personally like increases the amount of shame that you're experiencing for being in the relationship. Because a lot of times, as I'm talking to survivors, they'll say, I knew something was off. I knew something wasn't right. Like my gut was telling me something wasn't right about this relationship. Or
Yep.
maybe I know this person isn't good for me, but I'm not ready to leave. Like I get panicky, anxious, overwhelmed thinking about leaving. Maybe I don't want to leave because this is a significant person in my life, or because of finances or kids or whatever. And so there can be shame too around being in it or leaving it. Um,
Mm.
so it's just shame all around.
Yeah. So, wow, so I'm having a lot of thoughts go through my head right now. Um, it's interesting because maybe I can share a couple examples. Maybe this would be helpful for people to kind of help them identify if some of this is going on in their life. But growing up, I lived in a household where I was constantly walking on eggshells, and performance. Like I was trying to perform and always trying to get that
Yeah.
validation because there was just toxicity there. Well, as painful and as difficult as that was, it's actually given me a really good barometer to be able to identify when someone in my life is exhibiting those unhealthy patterns and I'm in a relationship with them, because I'll notice like my anxiety goes through the roof around this person. I feel like I'm trying to please them without realizing it,
Yep.
like this urge to want to please them, make sure they're happy with me, kind of a thing, because that's what it was like growing up, right? So I had a boss in particular that this was really, really, really bad with. It was a sales job. I was making really good money. He took really good care of me and my family at the beginning, like paid me very well just to train. I also broke my neck swimming in the ocean when I was in California for training, and he really showed up and like took care of us in that instance. But then after that, it became like, because I've done all these good things for you, and because I pay you so well, which don't get me wrong, I was working my butt off to earn that pay as well. Um, it was like he owned me.
Mm.
And really, a lot of what you're describing, like that guilt, the grief, it even brought up all of my parent issues and stuff
Yep.
like that. And I kind of noticed myself kind of projecting onto him like what I wanted in from a parent. Like I don't know. There's all this weird stuff going on,
Yes.
right? But then anxiety's through the roof. He then started coming in and really doing a lot of these like jabs and power plays and control. All of a sudden, I notice I'm working, instead of 40 to 45 hours a week, I'm working 60 plus hours a week because of just the expectation, like that ownership feeling, right? And I felt like I couldn't say
Yep.
no.
Yes.
And then to top it off, like I remember being on sales calls and he would come in and like act like he knew what somebody was saying on the other line when he had no idea, and he'd start telling me what to say, and if I said something different, he'd cuss me out and like just like stomping your face in the dirt kind of a feeling, right?
Mm.
And then to top it off, when I had our youngest daughter, she had just been born a couple hours previous. We hadn't even slept, and my other daughters hadn't even come and met our daughter, and he called me at 7 a.m. and said, I want you in here in an hour, and maybe you can leave a couple hours early today. And when I just in shock, I just told him I can't. I'm like, I'm in the hospital. Like, baby just came out, and like my daughters
Yeah.
are on their way to like meet their sister, and I haven't slept. And I was just said, I'm so sorry, but I can't come in. Like, I wasn't going to sacrifice that sacred time with my
Yeah.
family, right? Where we had such a close friendship too. And we had already talked about it, that I could have a few days off when the baby was born, et cetera. So then for him to come in, I mean, it was basically like a slap in the face. And then when I said very kindly and apologetically, I can't make it, he threw a tantrum and basically told me to find another job and hung up on me. And I was just sick. I mean, it just really, so you can see how you can be having such a special, sacred moment, and somebody who has really, really strong narcissism can come in and make it all about them and really make everything about them, and just really taint those experiences. That was a
Yeah.
horrible, horrible experience. It's a very extreme example. Um, but yeah, I mean, everything that you're describing, it's like that was 100% the relationship with this man. And I've noticed since then, like I got out of that environment, thankfully. But since then, I've been in relationship with other people in business as well, where all of those same warning signs come out, like that anxiety. I feel
Mm-hmm.
that sick pit in my stomach. I feel ashamed around this person, like I'm constantly doing
Yep.
something wrong, and then constantly like that urge to want to just kind of like bow down and do their every bidding, right? Um,
Yes.
yeah, like it sticks out like a sore thumb for me now, thankfully, but it's come through some very painful experiences to get
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. Well, that's huge. I'm sorry for all of that. I can't imagine how painful all that was. And I'm glad you brought up about how it can absolutely relate to childhood, and why in your case you're saying you've kind of learned, like, I notice when I start feeling this way around certain people, I know that's a toxic like something's going on there, that
Yes.
your body is sensing harm. And interestingly, that's also why you're likely feeling the pull to start people pleasing and feeling like you can't say no and like you just want to make them happy, because that same survival skill that you had to use as a child comes online,
Yes.
because your body is sensing this is unsafe. And our body typically then will move into a fight, flight, freeze, fawn
Yep.
response. And then we automatically start shifting into however we try to deal with that kind of person as a kid if we grew up in that dysfunctional home.
Yes, exactly. That's why
So
you might be kind of blown away, like if you're reacting a certain way or feel like you're reacting automatically to someone, how someone's
yes.
treating you. Like it can go really deep without you really even realizing it or being aware of it at all.
Yeah, and that's why these relationships can be so powerful, because until we do make that connection, there's almost something like feels familiar about those kinds of relationships. So that's where a
Mhm.
lot of clients, and I see survivors getting stuck, is like, I know this is like not, like, part of me is telling me it's not good, but at the same time, like, this is how it was growing up and these are the kinds of relationships I'm used to. So I guess this is just part of life and part of what you have to deal with. And
Yes.
so then you're almost like pulled into it because it's familiar, and familiar doesn't necessarily mean healthy or safe.
Right. So for those that have been pulled into a relationship with an intimate partner, for example, that with someone who's has narcissistic tendencies, etc., it's painful to admit it, but it could be what attracted you to them, or one piece of what may have attracted you to them, because it has that familiarity, that feeling of home, that feeling of, yeah.
Yeah.
And Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I don't know if you can speak more to that at all.
So I always want to put a caveat in here that it doesn't mean that you are responsible for being with a narcissist or attracting them. Because I know a lot of people will feel like, well, am I part of the problem? Like maybe we're two toxic people because I was attracted to them and they're attracted to me because they want to exploit me. And there's something about me that's attracted to that. It's not. It's not that you want to be exploited or that there's something wrong with you or anything like that. It's that when we grow up in a family where there's dysfunction and chaos, then love and chaos and dysfunction all kind of get thrown into the mix together. And so what happens in a family is that your mind is developing a schema or a mental map for what family or what it means to be in a relationship. And so as you grow up, there's a logical part of you that's like, I want a healthy partner, someone who respects me, understands me, loves me. But then at the same time, your body hasn't really experienced that because sometimes people grow up and they haven't really had healthy examples or healthy relationships. And so, toxicity, that hot and cold, that's almost what you know. So, relationships where there is that similar, sometimes things are good and sometimes things are bad, and I kind of feel anxious and I work really hard to make things better, that feels familiar. And there's a part of you that wants to heal that, but you don't really feel like you can just go get a healthy relationship and heal that. It's like, well, let me find somebody subconsciously who is also unavailable, like my parent was, or neglectful or whatever, and then I will work really hard and this time it'll be different. So it's coming from that
Mm.
part of you that like wants to heal and wants to make things better, but you don't know how to do that. So you're kind of playing out subconscious patterns of trying to make it better, trying to finally be good enough, as so many of us relate to.
Yeah, yeah, very interesting. So don't take it as like there must be something wrong with me
Yeah.
if I'm being attracted to this type of person. It could be that you're literally unconsciously trying to resolve
Mm-hmm.
something. And if you are in a relationship with someone that has these tendencies, like what do you do about it then? I mean, is this salvageable? I mean, if you got caught up in this pattern of trying to fix somebody because you're trying to
Yeah.
resolve something, like what do they do from there?
Yeah, that's the loaded question. Because it really depends. It depends on how significant of a relationship this person is to you. If it's a relationship you feel like you can or that you are able to or want to walk away from. But if you are in the relationship where a lot of people have to start because there is so much confusion initially, there's so much, is this me? Is it them? Like, what is happening here? I don't understand why I'm feeling so anxious and ruminative. Like, maybe it is me. Maybe I am being oversensitive. So I encourage people to use what I call DLA, which is document, label, affirm. So
Hmm.
you have to first start by documenting what is going on here. Like, what are the patterns of this relationship? Because narcissists and toxic people will be gaslighting you. Like in your example, honestly, the whole like making everything seem like it's fine and I care about you and your family. And then all of a sudden acting like you better be here right now, that like you get whiplash from that. Like this
Yes.
doesn't make sense. This is not what I've expected and come to expect based on this person's behavior. So that whole like, am I crazy here? Have I been misreading this the whole time? That's also part of the gaslight. So it's really important initially for people to document what's going on because it gets really confusing. And the narcissist is always denying, saying, I didn't do that and I didn't say that and we didn't agree to that and that's not how that happened. So
Hmm.
being able to go back and say, no, here's the text. Like I did say this, we did agree to this, we did talk about this. Having that is so helpful for your sanity.
Hmm.
And
That's really
once,
powerful.
yeah, you have to have that there with you. You have to be able to look back. And I will say, telling a narcissist this and being like, here's the text and here's the email where we agreed to that, it's not going to go well. You can do it to see what happens, almost like a test, like, is this as bad as I think it is? Like, let me show them proof. But you definitely need to do that with eyes wide open. This is really more for you to go
For
back and
yourself.
like, yes, I'm not crazy.
Yeah, exactly. Like, so what's happened is maybe in this relationship, your sense of self has been shaken,
Yeah,
right?
for
Because
sure.
of that gaslighting. And so you don't know what up is down, what up is
Hmm.
from down and what's true, what's not true. And so by getting that data, you're kind of getting back to clarity and able to hold space for yourself again, hold yourself in warm regard again.
Yep.
and get to truth. So
Yeah.
yeah, so it is more for you.
Absolutely. And because one of the biggest ways narcissists gaslight you is mislabeling you. They love to own your intentions. They tell you why you do things. They don't give you space to say, here's what I want, and here's what I need, and here are my feelings and thoughts and opinions and preferences. They tell you why you're doing things. So if you try to set boundaries, then they say you're being difficult. If you try to express your needs, they say you're ungrateful. If you try to say, hey, what you said hurt my feelings, they say you're too sensitive. So, absolutely, there's been a breakdown in these relationships of who you are. So, starting with what is not only what's true about this relationship, but what's true about me, that I really am trying to make this work, that I was kind, that I have been patient, that I have tried to talk about this in lots of different ways, that, you know, I am grateful that I do express that. Like, this is not me. So, that
Right.
documenting does a lot of things.
What does this look like for someone who struggles with pornography, compulsivity, sexual addiction? Um, how can this play into, well, just the difficulty of recovery
Yeah.
if they have these tendencies personally themselves?
So, research shows that sex addiction or sex addicts do display higher narcissistic traits, and that porn users score higher on the NPI, which is Narcissistic Personality Inventory. So, we know that there's this mix here. So, that if you are in active addiction, you are more likely to display narcissistic traits. Now, whether that means once the addiction, like you're kind of in your sobriety and you've recovered and you're doing the recovery work, we don't know whether that narcissism piece is going to still be there or not. We kind of have to wait and see, like, is this true narcissism or is this part of the addictive behavior?
Yep.
So if we do find that, okay, now I've been in sobriety, like I'm doing my recovery work, but that those narcissistic traits are still there, then we know that there was probably a narcissistic pattern underneath that as well. So if you are both highly narcissistic and you have a sex addiction, then essentially your narcissism is going to try to hijack your recovery process, because
Mhm.
the foundation of narcissism is that you have that insecure core. You care a lot about what other people think of you. Like, that's reputation is way more important than character. So the recovery process itself becomes about supply. It becomes about how can I actually make this work to my advantage so that people start either praising me for how amazing I'm doing in my recovery, or I get more sympathy and attention for the fact that I'm having to do all of these things. So it usually shows up in a couple of ways, either entitled grandiosity, like, look at everything I'm doing, look at all the support groups I've been in, the therapy that I've done. And the
Mm.
grandiose narcissist wants to become the leader. They want to become the sponsor. They want to move up the ranks and become known in their community as like this amazing person who's overcome this addiction. So they almost exploit even the recovery process, where they're not genuine in their recovery. They're using what their recovery can do for them.
Mm. Very interesting. Like, again, things people would not think about.
No, because outside people, we assume that people are like we are. So if you're like a kind, self reflective person who would do the work and you want your actions and words to match and you want to be authentic in the way you show up in the world and relationships, you assume other people are as well. And that's why a
Right.
lot of times we have no idea what to do with a narcissist or how to make sense of what they're doing. And we assume that they are just misunderstood, that they just had a traumatic background, that that's why they're acting out, that if they understood what they were doing, then they would want to change and they would want to get better. And they don't really want to hurt people. They're just acting out of their hurt. That's not the case with narcissists.
Right. Yeah. So this is a really big one to key in on for guys that are listening to this that are working through recovery. Just pay attention to potentially any shortcuts that you're making on the work personally. So if you would rather, look good in front of the group versus do the work yourself,
Yeah.
it doesn't mean that you're like, have a diagnosis here as a personality disorder or anything like that. But you might be displaying some of these tendencies and might be hindering your recovery instead of getting the self-validation and the self-healing through
Mm-hmm.
doing the work. You're getting validation externally, which we're accustomed to getting, right? We're getting
Mm-hmm.
validation through pornography, through sexually acting out. Um, And then maybe even, I know workaholism and stuff plays a factor too. Like we're getting validation at work when everything's suffering at home. Well, remember to do the work, right? And those external rewards and validations are not going to get you the outcomes that you actually desire. So it's just a shift in your focus and
Yeah.
attention back to the core of what really, really matters, which is the self work.
Yeah, because if it does just become about the validation, then you're really just prolonging the inevitable, which is going to blow up at some point anyways, because at some
Right.
point you are going to be found out, or the addiction's not going to get any better, and then it's going to be even worse than before. So
Yep.
it's much, much better to be able to put in that work. But for those that are narcissistic, that really being accountable to somebody else and having to humble yourself and show up and be like, I'm struggling with this, and not doing it with a pretense, not doing it with an idea of like how this is going to make me look, because most narcissists are really good at manipulating and looking very socially adept, and they learn in therapy, in group, what people want from me. What do people want to hear from me? What are the words that if I say, then everyone's going to think that I'm doing really well? And so they just learn how to show up and how to look like they're doing the work without actually doing the work. But there's a real resistance to actually being accountable or being called out. And I'll say too, if that there's any involvement from a religious organization or the church in an addiction process, like it can be so helpful. However,
Mhm.
unfortunately, what I often see happening is that church doesn't understand addiction, particularly sex addiction or porn addiction, and they don't understand narcissism. So
Yep.
the church becomes an enabler of the narcissist, because they also assume that they're doing the work if they're showing up. So they're not pushing back a lot on any arrogance or really making sure they're accountable. In fact, it usually the onus falls on the betrayed partner to be like, be loving, be supportive, making sure you're there for them. And
Yes.
it ends up being the partner who's like, that's the one that's getting all of the blame here if they're not showing up, or if they're being a little suspicious of how that narcissist is acting.
Yeah. Yeah. And I see that happen
Mm-hmm.
way too much, where the partner ends up kind of being blamed for the residual issues, because this person's like supposedly magically, healed and perfect now. And now it's the partner's problem or fault for not being sexual in the
Mm-hmm.
relationship or what have you, not trusting them yet. It's like, oh, well, there's a reason. And a lot of times the betrayed partner has very good reason. It's in their best interest to not yet fully extend that trust, right? But it is
Yeah.
hard for some of those external environments to see what's really going on.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the other piece, is that narcissists want quick results and immediate trust. So they
Yes.
are
Right.
telling the partner, um, it's your problem. Like, you need to do your recovery work. I'm doing my recovery work, but you need to be able to trust me. And how do you expect me to get better if I can't even have these, uh, you know, basic things in place? Like, I need to be able to get on the computer. I need to be able to do this for my work, and I need to be able to do this. And you're just going to have to get better at trusting me. And then the whole thing becomes about how the partner isn't trusting them. And the whole reason that they're in this situation in the first place gets completely lost. And that's
Yes.
something people and groups and churches can really be looking for. It's like, is the person really just focusing on hate this saying, like, let's move forward, the past is the past, there's nothing we can do to change it, but we
Get
just got
over
to
it.
look at
Move
the
on.
future. Yeah, move on. Like, I'm doing my recovery work, and all she wants to do, or the partners, like, bring up the things that ways that I've failed, and that doesn't help me. I really need to focus on where I'm going, not where I've been. And all this language that sounds so good, and to other people they can think, yeah, like, there's nothing you can do about the past, you have to forgive and move on. But that's because they don't want the accountability, and that's a way that narcissists look really good without actually having to be accountable.
Right. And they don't want to face the pain that the partner is
Yeah,
in. Like, because if I allow you to express that and be that, then it's like a personal attack on me, and I can't handle
for
that. So
sure.
you need to just get over this and move on, because it's what it's actually saying is I actually can't handle your pain.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. And narcissists, I mean, a lot of people struggle with shame, but narcissists, the way that they react to their shame is often raging and making it somebody else's fault. They really,
Mm.
really have a hard time sitting with what they have done and looking at it. So anytime that anybody brings up something where they would actually have to look in the mirror and look at themselves and go, ooh, like, that that's actually not good. Like that's not good that I did that or said that. That brings up so much shame that then they rage, and then it becomes about how that other person is doing them wrong, or it becomes about avoiding that accountability, or, you know, to your point, they just don't have the space or the empathy to actually want to sit and make it about the other person and make it about the hurt that they've done. They just want to move on from
Right.
it.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And guys, again, listening to this, if you're the one that struggled with pornography, etc., it's important to look at this. I see this all the time, right? Where I haven't looked at porn for a month. Why is my wife still mad at me?
Yeah.
Right. It's like, whoa, okay, well, there's a lot there,
Yeah.
because chances are there are other areas that we need to improve as well. But the damage has been done for so long, and a big part of our struggle with pornography is because we're lacking, like you said, Chelsey, that solid core.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have that solid sense of self personally. So we're seeking validation, pornography, and if it's escalated to other acting out behaviors, like is getting this pseudo validation. It's stroking the ego without the ego having to change at all. It's like, you know, the king baby analogy, right? And and so guys, when you're in that state, like you have a very weak sense of self. You are very incapable of taking criticism. It's too personal, it's too painful, because your resilience is so low. And so then when you know, you get caught viewing, or you decide to come clean, and now you're on this recovery path, you know, that weakened side of us wants the pain to go away now, but that's just not realistic. And so pay attention to this. If you're at the beginning or near the beginning, or sometimes, you know, several months, a year, maybe even longer into this, and the relationship is still working through healing, just know there's nothing wrong with this. It's a process, and it's the timeline's different for everyone. But for you to want to rush this and end up, as a result, kind of gaslighting your partner, blame shifting this stuff onto them, it's just not going to help you build that solid sense of self, that solid core. Really, what you should be doing is learning how to continue to hold space for yourself and fully hear, see, validate, empathize with your partner. Allow them to have the space to be able to express that grief and pain. And I know that's not fun. I know it's not fun sitting there and hearing your partner's deep, deep hurt over things that you've done. And maybe it's things you've done a long time ago. But the fact of the matter is that pain is very real to them right now. And what they need is for you to stay undefended and really show up for them and hold that space.
Yeah. That,
Go
that
ahead.
entitlement can be sneaky. You know, it doesn't
Yes.
necessarily feel like entitlement. Like if as an addict you're thinking, okay, I have been putting in the work, like you're saying, I haven't looked at it for a month or two, like why am I not getting anything back? And I think, you know, addict or narcissist, they can get kind of sucked into this idea of I'm ready to move on now. They need to be too. And so they're almost like
Mhm.
they want to own the way that their partner moves through the grief process or the healing process. So I think even that mindset shift of like, I'm on my journey and then they're on their own. Like, and I'm not responsible for that either. Like as an addict, give yourself permission to, your job is to do your journey. And whether or not the partner is ever able to forgive you, you're not going to be able to control. But you'll
Yes.
definitely make it worse if you take this why are you not over it yet mentality.
Right. So the goal is not to get their trust back, it's to be trustworthy.
Yeah, exactly. It's about
Right.
what you can do. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So getting it back in the eye and allowing them to have their healing process of whatever that is. And you're focused on, what does integrity look like for me?
Yeah. Yeah.
What does this look like then? Let's say someone who struggles with porn or sex addiction, and they're in a relationship with someone who is narcissistic. How does that impact their behaviors? I mean,
Mm.
because obviously they could very well, exhibit some of these tendencies as well. But what if they're in a relationship with someone who's a true blue narcissist as well?
So you're saying somebody is has a sex addiction and they are with someone who's narcissistic.
Yeah, like, and they're using it as a coping mechanism
Yeah.
uh,
That's
to deal with.
going to be a pretty volatile relationship, I'm going to say.
Yeah.
Because, you know, again, whether it's the addiction that's making you seem narcissistic, or there's narcissism there too. And some people wonder, like, could two narcissists ever even get together, because they seem like they would, like that would implode, or how does that happen? It can happen if both are benefiting from the other person. So
Right.
if it's working for both of you, like it's giving you both supply. But that's true too. I mean, there could be a scenario where someone's struggling with an addiction and they're with a narcissistic person, and then they find that pulls them more into that addictive behavior. So I think, again, it comes back to really honest self-reflection and looking at the relationship. So it's really not either or. I think we can get
Mm.
caught in that, like, well, that entitled mindset can come up, like, well, look at how my partner treats me, so I deserve this.
I get
Like,
to do what I want.
yeah, I'm going to do what I want. They're mistreating me anyways, and I don't deserve how they're going to treat me, so I'm going to do this. And it feels very, like, contemptuous and passive aggressive. So you're not directly confronting the issue. You're just, like, getting more and more into your addiction at that point. So I think
Right.
really both have to be addressed. Like, it is very important to look at your behavior. Are there any active addictions going on? And if so, make sure that you're addressing that. And then whether that, if you do have a narcissistic partner, then how they move through that healing process is still on them. So if they're a narcissist, then they're likely going to try to use that whole recovery process and healing process to benefit them. And it's that relationship is really going to struggle, probably
Yeah.
not likely to work. So ultimately what they do is still not your responsibility.
Yeah. Because I have seen, unfortunately, I've seen this where you have some really just like kind, sweet men that are very passive.
Yeah.
Um, Maybe they kind of take on a little bit more of that like feminine energy. I'm not saying that they're
Mm-hmm.
feminine, but that they're not really strong in that masculine
Yeah.
energy. They're not standing up for themselves. They're not, you know what I mean?
Yep.
And where they are just so shut down that, and then they're using porn to
Yes.
cope.
Yep.
Um, they're very, very emasculated, shut down, depressed, and they're just trying to cope. And
Yep.
that's, it all kind of comes down to ownership, personal ownership. Because there's no, kind of what I'm hearing you say is like, there's really no excuse or justification good enough, one, for you to justify acting, outside of the relationship sexually, right? Even if this person
Mm-hmm.
is very toxic,
Yeah.
but also to abuse yourself. Like, you don't deserve it,
Yeah.
no matter what's going on. But what you do need is just more support, right?
Yeah, for
Probably
sure.
in that situation, support and help and
Very
guidance.
much. Yeah, because that's going to get complicated. But I've seen that as well, of, yeah, some men who've been so emasculated that they then are acting out, and maybe it's from something that's been there since childhood they've struggled with, or maybe it's something that they've turned to try to cope with what's going on in the
Yeah.
relationship. But it's really sad and heartbreaking to see that as well, because then there can be a lot of even extra shame. And then the narcissist is probably using that, like, look at what you've done. And because there is some legitimacy, like, yeah, they shouldn't have been engaging in those sexually acting out behaviors. And so then that addict feels even worse. But
Hmm.
a betrayed partner who's not narcissistic really wants the addict to get better, and they're just hurt. So
Yep.
I've seen so many betrayed partners, like, give 100% despite being so hurt. They still have compassion, they're still empathetic, they still care. But someone who's more narcissistic just, like, beats that addict over the head with what you've done and how you've treated me, and this is all your fault. And then they
Yep.
even start acting abusively to the addict. And so, either way that it's going, like, both of you have to be taking responsibility for how you're treating the other person.
Yep. Yeah. And it's interesting. This pattern is what I witnessed growing up with
Mm,
between my parents.
yeah.
Like, my dad was just so shut down, and he was the problem,
Yeah.
you know. And but you got to realize, like, they're two sides to the same coin, really. uh and it is, we have to take personal ownership. We can't play the blame game in any of this, because it doesn't get you anywhere.
Yeah. Because ultimately, you are either going to be with this person, or maybe with someone else, or maybe single. And how do you want to show up in the world?
Yep.
So coming back to, yeah, like you said, what you can do, your own accountability. And that's why I always encourage survivors to do, or clients, is to be authentic. Like, what your partner's doing, if they are acting out, if they are narcissistic, can be so difficult. And there is something called reactive abuse, where if you have been just abused over and over and over again, and like you finally snap and act out of character yourself,
Yep.
that can happen. And so that's why it's so important for you to take care of you and to really know boundaries, which we can get into, because if you
Yep.
are taking responsibility for their healing or their recovery or what's going on with them, or you don't know the difference between their feelings and your feelings, it's going to be really hard for you to heal and think about, well, how do I want to show up and how do I want to be authentic? Because you may even be confused on what that even means. Like, what does it mean for me to be authentic?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Let's get into the boundaries piece. Maybe that's where we can wrap up today, because
Yeah.
now it's okay. I understand. I can see more clearly what's going on. Maybe retrospectively, like into myself, my own behaviors, what's going on with my partner. But then it's like, what do we do about it, and how do you
Yeah.
navigate through forward? Obviously, we're just gonna be able to scratch the surface of this. So, guys, we'll get into a little bit today, but this is why I highly recommend getting Chelsey's book, because she's going to be able to teach you so much more, or even working with her personally. But how does somebody go about setting boundaries with a partner who is narcissistic?
Mm-hmm. Well, first thing is, what is a boundary? That's another one of those words that's thrown around a lot, but we don't really know what
Yeah.
we're meaning. So I talk
Yep.
about it in my book, how you can think of a boundary like a bubble that surrounds you. We are very aware of when somebody is in our personal space. So when someone's physically, you imagine them like, 3 feet away and then a foot away, and then like they're right in your space. You're like, you are in my bubble. Like you literally feel like you want to push them away. So we're very aware of typically physical boundaries, but mental and emotional boundaries are much the same way. It's this feeling psychologically that somebody is really wanting something from you. They're pressing in on you and they want a specific outcome, or um, they want you to do something that they want, and you don't feel like you can move around freely in your bubble. You feel very judged for your own thoughts and feelings, or you start to feel like your bubble is expanding beyond what you can control. And that's when you start taking on responsibility for other people. You start feeling like completely overwhelmed and like you're stretched too thin and you're about to burst. So,
Yep.
boundary is that space between you and me. It's where I end and you begin. It's I have my thoughts and feelings and needs, and you have your thoughts and feelings and needs, and knowing that there's a difference between those two.
Mm.
And in relationships with narcissists, the most important boundaries we have to set are the ones we set mentally and emotionally. Because a lot of the boundary talk out there is for people in healthy relationships are like, tell them how you feel, tell them what you need, be direct, be upfront. That will literally backfire if you are dealing with a narcissistic person. You tell them what your boundary is or what you need, you've just told them exactly what button they need to push.
Yep.
So that's not the strategy to use with a narcissist. In these relationships, it's really about deciding whether or not you're going to believe what the narcissist says about you. Because
Mm.
as we were talking about earlier, they're going to continue to mislabel your intentions. They're going to tell you who you are and why you're doing what you're doing. So, an example I see a lot is that narcissists will ruin events. They'll ruin special occasions. If they know you have something at 7 o'clock on Tuesday night, they're going to have a crisis at 6:45 every Tuesday night. So,
Yep.
a lot of people won't tell the narcissist about their schedule. They won't tell them about events that they're doing. And then they tell them about it last minute. And then the narcissist says, you don't care about me. You're so selfish. You only think about your own schedule. You don't include me in anything. And then that can be really heavy for the survivor, who likely is a very empathetic, reflective person. But you
Right.
have to slow that down and think, actually, why am I doing that? It's because I've told them time and time and time again, and they throw a fit or they create a crisis. So I'm actually trying to avoid a crisis. I am
Mm.
trying to be considerate of all parties involved. I'm not being difficult. This is not the way that I would want to do things, but it's because of this repeated pattern. And so it's untangling the narcissist's voice from your mind. You are not who they say they are. They don't get to own your intentions and tell you why that you're doing certain things. You have to slow down and document, like we were talking about earlier, of what is going on here. Then label that's what's happening. There's the gaslighting, there's the passive aggressiveness, there's the entitlement that's happening. They think that they should just be able to get whatever they want. And
Yep.
in the same way, labeling yourself and your own intentions, that you are being kind and compassionate, and you have tried so much to make things work. um, so it's really making changes like that.
Yeah. So it's like I see a lot of times people try to establish boundaries, and really what they're doing is they're using them as a tactic of just trying to control their partner.
Yeah.
Right. And I get why, especially betrayed partners can really fall into that trap because their partner's behavior has been so out of control and their
Mm-hmm.
whole world's just been imploded, right? Like they don't know what's up from down because this person they thought they could trust is not trustworthy. And it's so destabilizing going through trauma. But I see people, and I mean, this is also a conversation maybe for another time, but like, see so many partners think a boundary is, you are going to do this and
Yeah.
you are going to do that because then I will somehow feel safe, but you can't control your partner. And that's the painful reality. And in this situation, it's like the same thing. You cannot control a narcissistic partner.
Mm-mm.
We can't control anybody but ourselves. And so the boundary is back to the I. What do I need
Yeah.
to have a solid sense of self here?
Yes,
Right.
exactly. Yeah.
Um, yeah, I don't know what your thoughts are there, but like,
Yeah, like you can certainly have, expectations. I think, but and this is where you have to slow down, know what's your sense of self, like what are your values, what can you live with, what can you not, and then be able to
mhm,
communicate those in the relationship. Like here's where I could see us working. If you're with an addict or someone who's going through recovery, like here are the things that I would have to know and feel and understand about our relationship to make this work. But that's very different than saying you have to do this in order for me to do this. And so in
yep,
any relationship, we should have expectations. Like we should be able to expect that our spouse is trustworthy, loyal, that we're going to be treated with respect and kindness. Like those are expectations. Um, but ever being able to feel like you can make somebody do that, or that you could make them understand something. I see a lot of survivors fall into that trap of like, well, if I could just explain it this way, I think that they'll change if they just understand this. I would say in my relationships, I always thought we're one insight away from making this work. So if I could just get them to read this book and understand this and do this, then things are going to get better.
right.
And so that's where I had to learn, no, actually, I can't take responsibility for something that I can't control. And what that other person does, or even what they understand, their perceptions, is not on me.
Yep. Yeah, I know one of the boundaries that my wife had when we were going through our stuff with me dealing with pornography and dishonesty was just around our intimacy. Was the boundary was if we're going to be sexual, I just need to know if you've acted out in any way beforehand,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that was a totally fair boundary because she wasn't trying to control me. It was like you are a grown man, you can do whatever
Yeah.
you decide to do. If you're going to look at porn, you're going to look at porn. But in order for me then to let my guard down, be vulnerable sexually with you, I need honesty. And
Mm-hmm.
so it was really a boundary of honesty. And then, a lot of guys are troubled by that because they feel like that honesty is going to make it worse. But that's that narcissistic voice, that entitlement coming in. It's your partner has every right to decide what they are going to do with their body
Mm-hmm.
and to whom they will entrust it with and under what circumstances. And so like that dishonesty is robbing them of that capacity. And this is why it's like so destabilizing when they find out that there's been infidelity, right? Whether even
Mm-hmm.
if it's just pornography, which is a form of infidelity, it's devastating because all of that feels tainted. They feel trampled on, and so it's so important to honor those boundaries. And I know, like, if you're struggling with some narcissistic tendencies, you're going to have that voice of justification come in like crazy and try to convince you that you're in the right and they're in the wrong. But focus in on what type of man you truly desire to be. If this is what's going on, like, what does integrity look like for you? And if you need help from other male voices outside of your own to help you kind of get clear on what those principles are for you so that you can hold on to something, because if you're struggling to figure that out yourself, like, it's okay to get support, but then you hold to that with everything you've got, because you deserve better, your partner deserves better, and you can change some of these tendencies that you have. It's going to take time, it's going to take practice. It's kind of like the compulsivity towards acting out, it feels so automatic because we've done it so many times, like we're conditioned for it. It's the same thing with these. These are tendencies that have been wired in since we were very, very young, typically. And so you can just go down that pathway without even realizing, but through awareness and honestly honoring your partner's boundaries if they're setting them, like you can really start to unravel some of this stuff and heal.
Yeah. I love that boundary that your wife set, because that was one that she could enforce. And because it wasn't about controlling what you did. It was like, you're going to make your choice, but here's where I'm going to be at if you do that.
Yep.
So that was something that she literally had control over.
Right, exactly. And then if I decided that I was going to be dishonest and tell her, like usually, like you said, you don't get away with these things long term.
No.
Eventually, it's going to come to a head.
Mm-hmm.
The truth will be made known eventually. And even if it's not verbally known or written or discovered, like intuitively, your partner's going to know. Your relationship is going to suffer. It's never going to be able to progress because there's this elephant in the room. And so she was just saying like, well, yeah. And if you decide to be dishonest, well, guess what? Like there are consequences attached to that. And so you have a choice either way. So she had choice, I had choice. And then it's like, okay, well, what am I going to choose?
Yes.
My encouragement to anyone listening today is just keep choosing recovery, keep choosing that higher sense of self, right? The higher picture, the bigger picture, the person you truly desire to be, the relationship you truly desire to have. And it's not going to just magically happen like this overnight on either side of this spectrum. It takes a lot of time and effort, persistence, a lot of failure and learning and getting back up, trying again. But it is possible. Healing is possible. And I think if you're in a relationship where you don't know if it's possible, that's where professional help, like help from Chelsey, is really important. Someone that can help you navigate through, can this be reconciled? Can this change? Can this heal? Or is this potentially too big? Yeah,
that's exactly where I start with a lot of my clients or a lot of times they come to me and they're like, I need to decide, should I stay? Should I go? Like, I don't know. I don't even know how to get to that decision or to make that clear. And so there is a path. There is a strategy where you can lay out all the puzzle pieces and go, okay, well, here's what it is. And here's what would have to happen for me to stay. And here's what it would be like if I go. And then once you have clarity, you can make those decisions from a more authentic place. But before you understand what's going on, you're still stuck ruminating on, is this me or is this them or is this fixable or is it not? So it's so important first to make sense of what is there.
Yes. If someone would like your help in doing that, where do they go?
Yeah. So you can go to my website. Yeah, there's a lot of different options there. My website, chelseybrookecole.com. You can work with me individually. I also have a 10-week healing group program for narcissistic abuse survivors and for those who've experienced betrayal trauma. Next one is coming up soon. And then, of course, my book that you can get it anywhere books are sold.
Got it. Right on. I think we might have just lost my video, but we'll just wrap this up, guys. All the links are right below as well. So down in the description, you can grab her book. Remember, it's If Only I'd Known How to Outsmart Narcissists, so set guilt-free boundaries and create unshakable self-worth. Check it out. Get it for yourself. And a link to her website is below as well. If you can still hear me, Chelsey, can you still hear me right now?
I can hear you, yeah.
Okay. Sorry, guys, my video just dropped out. But if you, for all of you that have stayed with us to the end here, just know there's hope. And if you're struggling with pornography and you need help, links below as well to our free community. And we also have a hands-on community where you can get the step-by-step just roadmap that you need to put pornography or sexual behaviors that are compulsive behind you forever. So links below. Thank you all for being here. And Chelsey, thanks for jumping on. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yep. Take care.